During his confirmation hearing to be the next Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson was asked a question about climate change, and given that he is the CEO of a company culpable in the acceleration of climate change, well, you would have expected him to either dodge the question or just outright deny the existence of anthropogenic climate change, but his answer was actually relatively surprising to some.
I came to my personal position over about 20 years as an engineer and a scientist, understanding the evolution of the science. Came to the conclusion a few years ago that the risk of climate change does exist and that the consequences of it could be serious enough that action should be taken. The type of action seems to be where the largest areas of debate exist in the public discourse. I think it's important to recognize the U.S. has done a pretty good job.
This is not quite as succinct as I was hoping. It's my understanding that you believe human beings...
I think we should let him finish, Mr. Chairman.
Human activity, you believe that human activity, based on your belief in science, is contributing to climate change.
The increase in the greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere are having an effect. Our ability to predict that effect is very limited.
So by watching that, most people would probably be inclined to believe that he's lukewarm on the topic, right? Because his answer certainly wasn't adequate, but by most people's standards, it was better than they would have expected. However, don't be fooled by his answer, because your expectations are in fact still correct. The Intercept explains, climate denial takes on many forms these days, some considerably more subtle than others, and at Wednesday's hearing, Tillerson displayed a mastery of obfuscation that only a son of ExxonMobil, a chief benefactor of climate denial, could have achieved, ostensibly acknowledging climate change while still denying the need to actually do anything about it that might significantly slow the burning of fossil fuels. Those listening to the hearing could be forgiven if they left believing Tillerson had committed to remaining a party to the Paris Climate Agreement, with its moderate goal of keeping the rise in Earth temperature below 3.6 degrees, but his leaky language left plenty of space for promises to fall through. Tillerson said repeatedly that he would push for the U.S. to retain a seat at the table, yet he noted President-elect Trump's commitment to America first and said that funding for international climate agreements would be reviewed from the bottom up. When Senator Jeff Merkley asked him to acknowledge the scientific finding that climate change increases the odds that certain types of extreme weather events will occur, Tillerson replied, "There's some literature out there that suggests that. There's other literature out there that says it's inconclusive." Such obtuse answers are a hallmark of the contemporary denial movement and reveal a suspicious lack of enthusiasm about heeding what the most definitive studies say. Tillerson is right that we can't predict exactly how deeply climate change will unravel us, but the range of possibilities laid out in innumerable studies warn against a wait-and-see attitude. The simple truth is that as Tillerson was shifting his corporation's rhetoric away from climate doubt, he was also pushing forward a program of oil and gas extraction that, if it continues apace, would prevent nations from achieving the Paris Agreement temperature goal. Tillerson's understanding of climate science and his stance on the Paris Agreement could have major consequences for the planet. As Secretary of State, he would become the agreement's steward, playing a key role in determining how quickly countries decarbonize their economies and in holding the U.S. to its emissions pledges. Failure to meet the Paris goal would likely have dire consequences for global populations, but the possibility of success is already spelling trouble for ExxonMobil because an agreement to burn fewer fossil fuels inevitably reduces the value of the vast oil and gas reserves currently held by the major oil companies. So in conclusion, you should not be fooled by Rex Tillerson. He poses an existential threat to humanity, and I'm not being hyperbolic by saying that. He plans to, at a minimum, not do anything about climate change, but worse, he could back out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, that agreement doesn't go far enough, in my opinion. I think we need more, and it's not ambitious enough, but to back out of that, and what little progress we could make because of that agreement, that would be catastrophic potentially, given how big of a country we are and how much fossil fuels we emit. Now, admittedly, I don't think we're going to get any better than this. someone who obfuscates the truth is probably the best we could have with the Trump administration. He's not going to get someone to be Secretary of State that believes in climate change and certainly that believes that it's anthropogenic. He's just not going to do that. So I think that someone who lies and is disingenuous is the best that we can get, which is really scary. So it's getting to the point where we need to stop relying on politicians. It's time we take drastic actions as individuals to reduce our carbon footprint. And this is going to amount to a significant change in the way of life for many of us. We can make a difference in our own households. So it's little things like conserving energy, choosing to bike to work instead of drive to work, or take public transit, choosing not to eat meat anymore, because factory farming, as much as we all don't want to admit it, is a huge contributor to climate change. It's time we individually act, because the government, they failed us. They're not going to do anything about climate change that's meaningful, that will actually save the planet. So it's in our hands now. Best believe that we are still going to pressure him to do something, because as we've seen with Tom Wheeler, who was appointed to the FCC after he was a Comcast lobbyist, he tried to kill net neutrality, but after a lot of grassroots resistance, he was forced to change his tune. So we need to do that same thing to Rex Tillerson. We need to call his office every single day. We need to protest in his office and not leave him alone until he acknowledges that anthropogenic climate change is a reality and he actually is going to act to do something about it. And in the meanwhile, while we're pressuring him, it starts with us. We've got to do something to reduce our own carbon footprint. It's tough, but this is where we're at if we want to go forward as a species.
Support this podcast by joining the independent progressive media revolution today at humanistreport.com.